Next, let's welcome to the next lesson. In this lesson, we're treating principles of genetics. So let's hop into the lesson. So first, we will explain what genetics is. Genetics is a branch of biology concerned with heredity and variation. So when you hear the word genetics, you should always remember something that has to do with heredity and also variation. So these principles of genetics, the principles of genetics were first established through classical experiments, leading to the discovery of how traits are inherited from one generation to another. So let's see how genetics, or let's see what are the progress that has gone so far in genetics. So genetics is based on the concept that traits are passed from parents to offspring through units of inheritance called gene. So in genetics, there is this belief that parents pass parts of their traits onto their offspring. So like what we see in humans, where you see the child, the offspring of a mother and a father, they would have traits of the father and also traits of the mother. So these traits are being passed on by what is called genes. So these genes are actually what genes from the father, genes from the mother come to combine and form what is called the daughter or the offspring. So these genes are located in the chromosomes and they composed of DNA. You can remember when we were talking about biomolecules, we talked about DNA being responsible for storing genetical identical materials. So this DNA is actually what is the chromosomes are made up of. It's actually what the genes are made up of. So genes are located on the chromosome and are composed of DNA. And this DNA carries instructions from a cellular function. So let's see. Each gene exists in different forms called alleles. So genes exist in different forms called alleles. An individual inherits one allele from each parent. So that's the reason why you will see a child cannot really completely just be the father's replica, like completely. They would actually be traced from both the mother and the father, because every individual is meant to inherit traits from both the mother and the father. So each individual inherits one allele from each parent, and the combination of these alleles determine the individual's genotype. So which in turn is responsible for the phenotypic ratio of that particular offspring. So alleles, each of the parents, they donate one allele each. Then this allele recombines and form the child or offspring. So this offspring now will then have a new configuration that is called the genotype, and this genotype is responsible for the phenotype of that organism. So the observable this phenotype is actually meaning the observable characteristics in the child, like the eyes, the nose, and so on. So dominant alleles express their traits even when paired with different alleles. So this is what we see where, in cases where it looks like as if the child looks more like the father or looks more like the mother. So in this kind of case, it doesn't mean that only the mother's gene was being transmitted, or only the mother's allele were being deposited to the child. What happened is that the mother's allele was probably a dominant in some aspects. So when the mother's dominant allele is dominant, it would express more. It will be expressed more in the offspring. So dominant alleles express their traits even when paired with different alleles, while recessive alleles only expressed when both alleles are the same. So the recessive alleles that are causing from one of the parents or the other, they will be only expressive when both alleles are weak, when both alleles are recessive. So this dominant recessive relationship is key in predicting trait inheritance. So this is actually one of the main things that is responsible for how you can predict what offspring could be given birth to. Like where we had the AA children, AS and SS. So due to this understanding, we can be able to predict, okay, a child that is being given birth to by parents having this and this genotype can become an offspring that probably has this genotype. So with all this being said, study of monohybrid and dihybrid crosses helps to understand how traits are transmitted, and these crosses demonstrate how alleles segregate and independently assort, forming the basis for Mendel's law. So there's a scientist called Mendel's, and his law actually is responsible for the segregation. Is kind of a guideline for segregation of genes and also independent assortment. We will see that later on in some other studies. So Modern genetics also includes molecular studies of DNA replication, transcription, translation, and even mutation, revealing how genes control biological functions and how changes in genes can result in inherited diseases or new traits. So, modern biology actually is it has brought a new light to the general understanding of how offsprings are being formed. So, from this study of modern biology, we've been able to currently scientists have been able to replicate genes, transcribe genes, and even create specific offsprings based on how they've studied the genes from the parents. So they can specifically say, okay, we want to give birth. Maybe they have maybe two different breeds of rat, and they want to specifically give birth to a new offspring that has dominant traits from the father and another dominant trait from the mother. They can use DNA replication to replicate these traits in the offspring, so that the offspring will have exactly the traits that they are targeting for it to get. So this understanding is very crucial in modern biology. And in conclusion, this principle of genetics provide a framework for understanding how traits are inherited, expressed, and altered. So when traits are being altered, it's called mutation. So from classical inheritance pattern to molecular mechanisms, genetics plays a central role in biology and medicine. So currently, biology and medicine has been seeing a new turn because of the understanding of genetics. So with all this said, we'll be heading on to the next lesson after now. Bye.